Hi, I'm Captain Emma Rodriguez. At my sister's wedding, she publicly announced that I was an embarrassment to our family because my military service and combat injuries made me damaged goods who didn't belong at elegant social events. She thought humiliating me in front of 400 guests would finally put me in my place and prove that wounded veterans should stay hidden from polite society. What she didn't know was that 300 veterans from across the country.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you.
Had secretly coordinated to attend her wedding, and when she finished her cruel speech, they would stand as one to show her exactly what honor and family really looked like. The scars my sister called embarrassing weren't just marks on my skin. They were testament to 8 years of dedicated service with the Army's 82nd Airborne Division, including 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan, where I'd led paratroopers through some of the most dangerous missions in the global war on terror. My damaged goods status came from an IED explosion outside Kandahar that had killed 2 of my soldiers and left me with burns across 30% of my body, a titanium rod in my left leg, and shrapnel scars that mapped the story of surviving an attack that should have killed me. While other officers my age were transitioning to civilian careers, I'd spent 18 months in rehabilitation, learning to walk again while grieving soldiers who hadn't survived the blast that changed all our lives forever. The injuries my sister found embarrassing had earned me a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star with Valor, and the profound respect of every soldier I'd ever served with. But to her, they were visible reminders that her sister was no longer the perfect military officer who'd once made the family proud. I was now a disabled veteran who drew uncomfortable stares at social gatherings. My foundation in the military had been built at West Point, where I'd graduated in the top 10% of my class before earning Ranger qualification and airborne certification. The path to company command had been demanding but rewarding, leading soldiers who trusted me with their lives while executing missions that required split-second decisions where failure meant American casualties. But my sister Victoria had never understood the deeper meaning of military service. As senior partner at Rodriguez & Associates, the most prestigious law firm in San Antonio, she measured success through billable hours, client acquisitions, and the kind of professional status that came with representing Fortune 500 companies in high-stakes litigation. Growing up in our family meant that achievement was everything, but appearance mattered just as much. Our parents had immigrated from Mexico with nothing but determination and the belief that their daughters could achieve anything in America if they worked hard enough and maintained the perfect image of success. Victoria had embraced this philosophy completely, building her legal career on flawless presentation, impeccable social connections, and the ability to navigate elite circles where image was as important as competence. Her engagement to Marcus Wellington III, heir to real estate fortune and member of San Antonio's most exclusive social circles, represented the culmination of everything our parents had dreamed about in American success. But my combat injuries had disrupted the family's perfect narrative. Instead of the decorated military officer who'd made them proud, I'd become a wounded veteran who required medical accommodations and drew attention to the costs of military service that made wealthy civilians uncomfortable. Emma doesn't understand that some sacrifices affect the whole family, Victoria had told our mother during a conversation I'd overheard while recovering from my latest reconstructive surgery. Her injuries make people uncomfortable at social events. She needs to accept that her military career is over and find ways to contribute that don't draw attention to what happened to her. Find ways to contribute that don't draw attention to what happened to her? As if surviving an attack that killed my soldiers was something shameful rather than evidence of courage under fire. The upcoming wedding was meant to be Victoria's moment of perfect achievement, a celebration that would establish her position in San Antonio's social elite while showcasing our family's success story. Everything had been planned to perfection, from the venue at the historic Majestic Square to the guest list that included judges, politicians, and business leaders who could advance both her career and her new husband's real estate empire.
But my combat injuries represented a complication Victoria hadn't planned for. Visible evidence that even successful families paid prices for their achievements, and that some forms of service came with costs that couldn't be hidden behind perfect smiles and elegant decorations.
Victoria and I had been inseparable as children, the kind of sisters who dreamed together about conquering the world and making our immigrant parents proud of what their daughters could achieve in America. Growing up in San Antonio's East Side, we'd shared a bedroom, traded clothes, and promised each other that we'd always be a team no matter how successful we became. Emma's going to be a general someday, Victoria would tell our parents' friends during family gatherings, beaming with pride when I won academic awards or excelled in JROTC programs. She's the smartest, bravest person I know, and she's going to make history in the military. Our relationship had been built on mutual admiration and complementary strengths. Victoria excelled in debate and public speaking, skills that would eventually make her a formidable attorney, while I gravitated toward leadership and tactical thinking that pointed toward military service. We'd supported each other through high school challenges, college applications, and the early years of building our respective careers. The Rodriguez sisters are going to take over the world, Victoria had declared during my West Point graduation, her voice filled with genuine excitement about our shared future. Emma will protect the country while I change the legal system. We'll be unstoppable together. For years, our relationship had thrived on this dynamic. Victoria would brag about my military achievements to her law school classmates and corporate colleagues, positioning my service as evidence of our family's patriotism and commitment to excellence. When I earned my Ranger tab and Airborne qualification, she displayed the photos prominently in her law office. "My sister is leading paratroopers in Afghanistan," she'd tell clients during small talk before depositions, her voice carrying genuine pride. "She's everything I admire about courage and leadership under pressure." But something had shifted during my first deployment to Afghanistan. The reality of military service, the danger, the stress on families, the possibility of injury or death had begun to affect Victoria in ways she hadn't anticipated. She'd started requesting that I not discuss operational details during our family calls, claiming that hearing about combat missions made her too anxious to focus on her legal work. "Emma, I support what you're doing, but I can't handle the details," she'd said during one of our video calls from Bagram Air Base. "Maybe you could just tell us you're safe and leave out the scary parts." The first signs of real strain appeared during my second deployment to Afghanistan, when the intensity of combat operations and my responsibilities as a company commander meant longer gaps between family communications. Victoria interpreted my focus on military duties as evidence that I was losing perspective on civilian priorities and family obligations. "It's like she's forgotten that she has a life outside the Army," Victoria complained to our mother during a conversation I'd heard about secondhand. "She's becoming one of those career military people who can't relate to normal society." Normal society. As if protecting American interest in combat zones was abnormal compared to representing corporate clients in air-conditioned law offices. But the fundamental break in our relationship occurred when I was wounded. Victoria's initial response had been appropriate sympathy and support, visiting me during my early recovery and expressing gratitude that I'd survived. However, as the extent of my injuries became clear and the long rehabilitation process began, her attitude shifted from relief to something more complicated. "Emma's going to need to accept that her military career is probably over," she'd told relatives during family updates about my recovery. "Maybe this is an opportunity for her to transition to something more suitable for someone with her education and background."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Something more suitable. As if my combat injuries disqualified me from continued military service, rather than representing evidence of sacrifice that had earned deeper commitment to serving other veterans facing similar challenges.
The betrayal began 3 months before Victoria's wedding, when she called to discuss what she termed family presentation considerations for her upcoming marriage to Marcus Wellington III. I just completed my latest round of reconstructive surgery and was preparing to return to limited duty, excited to share the progress with my sister who'd once celebrated every military milestone. Emma, we need to talk about your role in the wedding, Victoria began, her voice carrying the careful tone she used for difficult legal negotiations. Marcus and I have been discussing how to handle certain complications that might affect the ceremony's overall atmosphere. Complications. I was already feeling uneasy about where this conversation was heading, but nothing could have prepared me for the calculated cruelty that followed. The scars are more noticeable than I expected, she continued, apparently having reviewed recent photos from my medical appointments. And the way you walk now, it's obvious that something traumatic happened. Marcus's family and our guest list include people who might find visible injuries disturbing during what should be a celebration. Visible injuries. My sister was discussing my Purple Heart wounds like aesthetic flaws that might detract from her wedding's visual appeal, rather than evidence of sacrifice made in service to our country. Victoria, what exactly are you asking me to do? I said, hoping I was misunderstanding her concern. We're asking you to consider whether attending the wedding is really in everyone's best interest, she replied, her attorney training evident in how she'd phrased the request as concern for my welfare rather than rejection based on my appearance. The suggestion hit me like a second IED blast. My own sister was uninviting me from her wedding because my combat injuries might make her wealthy guests uncomfortable during their elegant celebration. You want me to skip your wedding because I got hurt serving our country? I asked, still unable to believe what I was hearing. Emma, don't be dramatic. This isn't about patriotism or service. This is about understanding that some situations require sensitivity to how others might react. Marcus's family has expectations about social events, and visible reminders of violence might create an uncomfortable atmosphere. Visible reminders of violence. My sister was characterizing my injuries as graphic displays rather than honored wounds earned protecting the freedoms that allowed her to build her legal career and marry into wealthy families. But Victoria wasn't finished. She'd apparently prepared a comprehensive argument for why my presence would be inappropriate, treating my exclusion like a legal brief where she needed to establish precedent and justify her position. The wedding photos will be published in San Antonio Society magazine, she explained, as if media coverage was more important than family unity. The images will represent our family for years to come. We need to consider how Emma's visible injuries might affect the narrative we're presenting about success and achievement. The narrative we're presenting? My sister was positioning my combat wounds as contradicting a story about family success rather than representing the ultimate evidence of service and sacrifice that should make any family proud. The reception includes judges, business leaders, and potential clients who could influence both our careers. Emma's presence might shift focus away from the celebration toward uncomfortable conversations about military service and war injuries. Uncomfortable conversations about military service? During a wedding that should have been celebrating love and family, Victoria was worried that my presence might remind guests that American prosperity was protected by soldiers who sometimes paid physical prices for their service. The final blow came when she suggested alternatives that revealed how completely she had dismissed my worth as both a sister and a veteran. Maybe Emma could attend the ceremony but skip the reception, she proposed, as if treating me like a second-class family member was a reasonable compromise. Or she could participate virtually through video call so she feels included without creating awkward situations for other guests. Virtual participation.
My sister was suggesting that I watch her wedding on a computer screen because my sacrifice-earned scars might embarrass her in front of people whose approval mattered more to her than her own family. The betrayal was complete and calculated, delivered with legal precision that left no doubt about Victoria's priorities. Her wedding to Marcus Wellington III was more important than her relationship with the sister who'd once been her closest ally. And my military service, including the wounds that proved my commitment, had become an embarrassment to be hidden rather than an honor to be celebrated. The sister who'd once promised we'd conquer the world together was now asking me to disappear from her most important day because my visible sacrifice didn't match the perfect image she wanted to present to San Antonio's social elite.
In the weeks following Victoria's devastating phone call, she launched a sophisticated campaign to justify her exclusion of me from the wedding by positioning herself as the protective sister, making difficult decisions for everyone's benefit. Every family conversation became an opportunity to reinforce her narrative about my need for healing time rather than public appearances. Emma's still adjusting to her injuries became Victoria's standard explanation when relatives asked about wedding planning and my role in the ceremony. We think it's better for her recovery if she doesn't feel pressured to attend large social events before she's completely comfortable with her new situation. Victoria had rebranded my combat wounds as a personal adjustment issue rather than honored sacrifices that any family should celebrate and support publicly. She began sharing carefully edited versions of my medical progress with family members, emphasizing the challenges while downplaying my determination to return to active duty. When I mentioned completing physical therapy milestones, Victoria translated it for relatives as, "Emma's still struggling with basic mobility and might not be ready for demanding social situations." When I described my plans to continue serving as a wounded warrior advocate, she retold it as, "Emma's having trouble accepting her limitations and might benefit from focusing on private recovery rather than public appearances." The most insidious aspect of her campaign was how she recruited Marcus's family to participate in the narrative about my need for protection from uncomfortable social interactions. His mother, Patricia Wellington, began referring to my absence as thoughtful accommodation for someone dealing with trauma. Victoria's being so considerate of Emma's healing process, Patricia would tell other wedding guests, positioning my exclusion as evidence of my sister's compassion rather than her shame about my appearance. It takes real sensitivity to understand that some people need privacy during recovery. Privacy during recovery, as if my return to military service and advocacy work for wounded veterans indicated someone hiding from society rather than someone committed to continued public service despite physical challenges. Victoria also began controlling the family narrative about military service by distinguishing between heroic service that ended with honor and tragic service that ended with visible reminders of war's costs. My pre-injury military career was presented as admirable achievement, while my current status was characterized as unfortunate aftermath that required family support and social accommodation. Emma served her country beautifully, Victoria would tell wedding guests who asked about my absence, but now she's dealing with the consequences of that service. We're trying to give her space to heal without the pressure of social expectations. Social expectations, as if attending my own sister's wedding was an unreasonable demand rather than basic family inclusion that should have been automatic regardless of my physical condition. The financial manipulation was equally calculating. Victoria began suggesting that my military disability compensation meant I didn't need to worry about networking or career advancement through social events like her wedding. Emma's financial situation is stable through her military benefits. She doesn't need to attend business-oriented social events like people who are still building their careers. But perhaps the most painful manipulation was how Victoria repositioned my commitment to wounded veteran advocacy as evidence that I was dwelling on the negative rather than moving forward with civilian life. Emma's become obsessed with military issues and trauma, she confided to our parents during a conversation I overheard. She talks constantly about wounded veterans and military service instead of focusing on building a normal life. Maybe stepping back from public events will help her develop interests outside the military. The conversation suggested that my continued service and advocacy work represented psychological dysfunction rather than purposeful commitment to helping other veterans facing similar challenges. Most devastatingly, Victoria convinced our parents that protecting me from social stress was more important than family unity during her wedding. She'd successfully reframed my exclusion as medical accommodation rather than discrimination based on my appearance. The best thing we can do for Emma is let her recover privately without the pressure of representing the family at high-profile events. If we stop pushing her into social situations before she's truly prepared, she'll be able to heal faster and rejoin normal family activities when she's truly prepared. By the time her wedding approached, Victoria had spent months positioning my absence as evidence of her thoughtful concern rather than her embarrassment about my visible sacrifice, while convincing our family that inclusion would harm rather than heal my relationship with civilian society.
The awakening came during a Wounded Warrior Project meeting at the San Antonio Military Medical Center, where I was volunteering to help recently injured veterans navigate the complex transition from combat casualty to rehabilitation success. I was sharing my story with a group of soldiers dealing with their own visible and invisible wounds when one of them asked a question that changed everything. "Captain Rodriguez," said Staff Sergeant Marcus Johnson, a triple amputee who'd lost both legs and an arm to an IED in Syria, "how do you handle family members who treat your injuries like something to be ashamed of instead of something to be proud of?" The question hit me with unexpected force because it crystallized exactly what Victoria had been doing, treating my Purple Heart wounds as sources of family embarrassment rather than evidence of honorable service that deserved respect and celebration. My sister asked me not to attend her wedding because my scars might make her guests uncomfortable, I found myself admitting to the group, voicing the humiliation I'd been carrying privately for months. The reaction was immediate and powerful. 20 wounded veterans, representing every branch of service and every type of combat injury, responded with a mixture of outrage and recognition that told me I wasn't alone in facing family members who couldn't handle the visible costs of military service. "Captain, that's not about your scars," said Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a Marine who'd lost her right arm in Fallujah. "That's about people who want to benefit from military protection without acknowledging the sacrifice that makes their freedom possible." The observation was profound because it reframed Victoria's rejection in terms of broader societal attitudes about military service. She wasn't just embarrassed by my appearance, she was uncomfortable with being reminded that her comfortable civilian life was protected by people who sometimes paid physical prices for their service. "Ma'am, you know what we should do," suggested Corporal David Williams, an Army Ranger who'd suffered severe burns in Afghanistan. "We should all show up at her wedding." 300 wounded veterans in dress uniforms showing everyone what real honor looks like. The suggestion was initially meant as dark humor, but as the group discussion continued, it evolved into something more serious. These veterans had all experienced some form of family or social rejection based on their injuries, and they recognized an opportunity to make a statement about the value and dignity of wounded warriors. "I'm serious about this," Corporal Williams continued. "Captain Rodriguez has been helping veterans in this community for months without asking for anything in return. Maybe it's time for the community to help her." The idea gained momentum as more veterans joined the conversation. They'd all been following my advocacy work for wounded warriors, my efforts to improve medical care and family support services, and my continued active duty service despite my injuries. Many of them had benefited directly from programs I'd helped establish or resources I'd connected them with. This isn't just about Captain Rodriguez, explained Chief Petty Officer Maria Santos, a Navy EOD specialist who'd lost her hearing and suffered traumatic brain injury during a bomb disposal operation. This is about every veteran who's ever been told their sacrifice is too uncomfortable for polite society. The awakening was sudden and complete. I'd been focusing on Victoria's personal rejection of me as her sister, but these veterans helped me understand that her attitude represented something larger and more damaging, a civilian society that wanted to benefit from military protection while remaining insulated from the human costs that made their security possible. Captain, you've spent months helping us understand that our injuries don't diminish our worth, said Sergeant Johnson. Maybe it's time for us to help your family understand the same thing. The conversation continued for hours, evolving from emotional support into tactical planning for what would become the most powerful demonstration of veteran solidarity and family values that San Antonio had ever witnessed. By the time the meeting ended, I understood that Victoria's wedding wasn't just about family dynamics. It was about whether wounded veterans would be hidden from society or celebrated as the heroes they'd proven themselves to be through their sacrifice and continued service. The awakening had transformed my personal humiliation into a mission that could benefit every veteran struggling with family members who treated their injuries as embarrassments rather than honors earned through service that protected everyone they claimed to love.
The strategy that emerged from the Wounded Warrior Project meeting was unprecedented in its scope and devastating in its implications for Victoria's carefully planned society wedding. What had begun as emotional support for my exclusion evolved into the most coordinated demonstration of veteran solidarity that San Antonio had ever witnessed. This operation requires military precision, declared Master Sergeant Jennifer Torres, a 20-year Army veteran who'd lost her left leg in Iraq and now coordinated veteran advocacy programs across South Texas. We're not crashing a wedding. We're conducting a demonstration of family values and veteran dignity. The psychological warfare aspect was crucial. Victoria had positioned my exclusion as protecting her guests from uncomfortable reminders about military service costs. The veteran community would respond by surrounding her wedding with proud displays of exactly what she'd tried to hide, wounded warriors who refused to be ashamed of their sacrifice. Every veteran who attends will be in dress uniform, Master Sergeant Torres explained during our planning session at the VFW Hall. Purple Hearts, Bronze Stars, Silver Stars, we want every medal displayed. We want Victoria's guests to see exactly what honor looks like when it's worn properly. The logistics were staggering. Word had spread through veteran networks across Texas and beyond, with wounded warriors volunteering to travel hundreds of miles to support a fellow veteran whose family had rejected her for the same injuries that made her a hero to the military community. We've got confirmations from veterans in Houston, Dallas, Austin, El Paso, and even some flying in from other states, reported Sergeant First Class Michael Chen, who is coordinating travel and accommodations. Current count is 280 veterans confirmed, with more still responding. The strategic messaging was equally important. This wasn't about disrupting Victoria's wedding, but about demonstrating what genuine family support looked like when someone earned it through service and sacrifice rather than inherited it through social connections. We're going to show up early, form honor formations outside the venue, and conduct ourselves with the same professionalism we brought to military service, explained Lieutenant Colonel retired Patricia Morales, a former battalion commander who'd volunteered to coordinate the overall operation. The contrast would be undeniable. While Victoria had excluded her combat-wounded sister to protect guests from discomfort, the veteran community was mobilizing to honor that same sister with the largest display of military respect San Antonio had seen since Veterans Day parades.
Captain Rodriguez has spent months helping veterans in our community, Lieutenant Colonel Morales continued. She's connected wounded warriors with medical care, family support services, and advocacy resources that changed lives. This is our opportunity to demonstrate the kind of family loyalty she's shown us. The communication strategy was equally sophisticated. Local media would be notified about the veteran gathering, ensuring that Victoria's wedding would be covered not as a society celebration, but as a demonstration of military values versus civilian priorities. The story writes itself, explained Chief Warrant Officer David Kim, a former military journalist who'd lost his right arm in Afghanistan. 300 veterans honoring a wounded warrior whose own family rejected her for the injuries she earned protecting their freedom? But the most powerful element of the strategy was emotional. These veterans weren't just attending a wedding, they were reclaiming the narrative about wounded warrior value and family loyalty that Victoria had tried to redefine through my exclusion. Every veteran attending has experienced some form of civilian rejection or discrimination, Master Sergeant Torres observed. This is bigger than Captain Rodriguez's family situation. This is about whether wounded veterans will be hidden from society or celebrated as the heroes they've proven themselves to be. The irony was perfect. Victoria had excluded me to protect her social image and maintain her narrative about family success. Instead, she'd created the conditions for the most public demonstration possible of what real honor, real service, and real family loyalty actually look like. When those 300 veterans stand in formation outside that venue, Victoria Wellington is going to learn that some families are chosen rather than inherited, and some loyalty is earned rather than expected. The strategy was designed to transform my personal humiliation into a teaching moment that would resonate far beyond one family's dysfunction, demonstrating that veteran dignity couldn't be hidden to protect civilian comfort.
Saturday, October 14th, 2 p.m. Victoria's wedding day had arrived with perfect weather and flawless coordination, exactly as she'd planned for her debut into San Antonio's social elite. The historic Majestic Square venue was decorated with white roses and crystal chandeliers, while guests in designer gowns and tailored suits mingled during the pre-ceremony reception, unaware that 300 veterans were positioning themselves for the most powerful demonstration of honor and dignity the city had ever witnessed. I stood at my bedroom window, watching news vans arrive at the venue as word spread about the unprecedented veteran gathering. The media attention had exceeded our most optimistic projections. Every major Texas news outlet was covering the story of wounded warriors honoring a fellow veteran whose family had rejected her for combat injuries. "Captain Rodriguez, this is Master Sergeant Torres," came the radio call on my military communication device. "All units are in position. We have 312 veterans confirmed on site, representing every branch of service and every major conflict since Vietnam." 312 veterans. The number was staggering, representing wounded warriors who'd traveled from across the country to support someone they'd never met, but whose story had resonated with their own experiences of civilian rejection and family dysfunction. At 2:30 p.m., I arrived at Majestic Square in my dress blue uniform, every ribbon and medal positioned with precision that reflected 8 years of military service and the respect these decorations represented. The scene that greeted me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Hundreds of veterans in formation, their uniforms immaculate, and their bearing reflecting the same pride they'd brought to military service. "Captain Rodriguez on deck," announced Lieutenant Colonel Morales as I approached the veteran formation. "All personnel, present arms." The salute that followed was executed with parade ground precision, 312 veterans rendering honors to a fellow warrior whose family had declared her an embarrassment. The contrast with Victoria's rejection couldn't have been more stark or more powerful. Inside the venue, Victoria's carefully planned society wedding was proceeding exactly as rehearsed. The ceremony had concluded without incident, and guests were mingling during the cocktail hour before the reception dinner where Victoria had planned to give a speech about family, success, and the Wellington name.
"Ma'am, what's our next move?" asked Staff Sergeant Johnson, positioned near the venue's main entrance, where arriving guests could see the veteran formation that had surrounded the building. "We wait," I replied, checking my watch as the reception schedule moved toward the moment Victoria had chosen for her family presentation. The psychological impact on Victoria's guests was already evident. Wealthy San Antonians who'd expected an elegant social event found themselves surrounded by wounded warriors whose presence created unavoidable reminders about the costs of military service that protected their comfortable lives. "The media is requesting interviews," reported Chief Warrant Officer Kim, monitoring news coverage on his phone. "CNN, Fox News, and all local stations want statements about why 300 veterans are honoring someone whose family excluded her from the wedding." The story was writing itself exactly as we'd hoped. Victoria's exclusion of her wounded warrior sister, juxtaposed with the veteran community's overwhelming support, created a narrative about values, loyalty, and the true meaning of family that no amount of social media management could control. At 4:15 p.m., the moment arrived. Victoria stepped to the microphone in the reception hall, prepared to deliver the speech about family success and social achievement that would establish her position among San Antonio's elite. She had no idea that her words would be broadcast live to news audiences across the country, or that 300 veterans were listening through communication devices that would capture every syllable. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone whose careful planning was about to be vindicated. "I want to thank you all for joining Marcus and me on this perfect day, surrounded by the people who matter most to our family's future." The people who matter most. As she continued her speech, Victoria was about to discover that her definition of family loyalty would be publicly contrasted with the kind of loyalty that had brought wounded warriors from across America to honor the sister she'd declared an embarrassment. The execution phase of our operation was about to transform Victoria's moment of social triumph into a lesson about what honor actually looked like when it was demonstrated by people who had earned the right to define it.
Victoria's speech continued for 12 minutes, during which she delivered the most devastating public humiliation of my military service and personal character that I'd ever experienced. Speaking to 400 guests and live television cameras, she transformed what should have been a wedding celebration into a calculated attack on wounded veterans and military families. "Some people might wonder why my sister Emma isn't here today," Victoria said, her voice carrying the practiced confidence of a trial attorney presenting closing arguments. "The truth is that Emma has become an embarrassment to our family through her obsession with military service and her inability to move beyond the injuries that define her identity. An embarrassment to our family." The words echoed through the reception hall and across live news feeds, ensuring that millions of people would witness Victoria's public rejection of a combat-wounded veteran whose only crime was surviving an attack that killed her soldiers. "Emma refuses to accept that her military career is over," Victoria continued, apparently oblivious to how her words were being received by the veteran formation surrounding the venue. "She clings to her injuries like badges of honor instead of moving forward with civilian life that would be more appropriate for someone with her education and background." Clings to her injuries like badges of honor? Victoria was characterizing Purple Heart wounds as attention-seeking behavior, rather than evidence of sacrifice made in service to the country that protected her freedom to build her legal career. "Marcus and I decided that our wedding should celebrate people who've made positive contributions to society," she said, reaching the climax of her character assassination. "We couldn't include someone whose visible trauma and military obsession would detract from what should be a joyful occasion." Visible trauma and military obsession? My sister was describing combat injuries and continued service as character flaws that disqualified me from family celebrations, speaking to an audience that included judges, business leaders, and social elite who were hearing her define family loyalty in terms that excluded wounded veterans. But Victoria's cruelest statement was yet to come. Some families have members who understand their limitations and find appropriate ways to contribute, she said, concluding her character assassination. Other families have members who refuse to accept reality and continue pursuing fantasies that make everyone around them uncomfortable. Emma, unfortunately, represents the latter category. The silence that followed her speech was profound. 400 guests processing the most callous rejection of military service they'd ever witnessed during what was supposed to be a celebration of love and family unity. That's when Lieutenant Colonel Morales activated the tactical response we'd prepared for exactly this moment. "All veterans, execute Operation Family Honor," came the radio command that was heard simultaneously by 312 wounded warriors positioned around the venue. What happened next was the most powerful demonstration of military precision and veteran solidarity in San Antonio history. Every veteran rose from their position, whether they were standing in formation outside, sitting in wheelchairs, or supported by prosthetic devices, and rendered a perfect military salute toward the reception hall where Victoria had just finished destroying her sister's character. The salute was held for 60 seconds, long enough for every news camera to capture the image of hundreds of wounded warriors, honoring the veteran Victoria had declared an embarrassment. The contrast was undeniable and devastating. My sister's wealthy guests witnessing true honor displayed by people who'd earned the right to define it. "Ladies and gentlemen, inside the reception," Lieutenant Colonel Morales announced through a portable PA system that carried her voice clearly into the venue. "You have just heard someone describe a Purple Heart recipient and Bronze Star winner as an embarrassment to her family. 300 veterans from across America have traveled here to show you what family loyalty actually looks like." The announcement created chaos inside the reception as guests realized they were surrounded by wounded warriors who'd witnessed Victoria's speech and were responding with military discipline that highlighted the cowardice of her rejection. "Captain Emma Rodriguez is not an embarrassment. She is a hero who led soldiers in combat, survived an attack that killed her men, and continues serving wounded veterans despite injuries earned, protecting the freedom that allowed this wedding to take place." Victoria's face had gone completely white as she realized that her private family decision had become a public referendum on veteran dignity and civilian gratitude, with 300 wounded warriors providing the moral authority that her legal expertise couldn't challenge or dismiss.
5 years after Victoria's wedding became the most powerful demonstration of veteran solidarity in Texas history, I stood before a joint session of Congress delivering testimony about the Wounded Warrior Family Support Act, legislation that would provide resources and advocacy for veterans facing family rejection or discrimination based on combat injuries. The hearing room was packed with lawmakers, military leadership, and wounded veterans from across the country, all gathered to hear about how family support systems could either accelerate or devastate the recovery process for combat wounded service members. "Honorable members of Congress," I began, clicking to a slide showing statistics about veteran family dynamics. "We've learned that family rejection can be more devastating to wounded warrior recovery than the original combat injuries themselves. When families treat sacrifice as embarrassment, we lose veterans to suicide, substance abuse, and social isolation that could be prevented through proper education and support." Victoria sat in the gallery, now serving as National Director of the Family Reconciliation Foundation we'd established together. The sister who'd once called me an embarrassment had become one of the country's most effective advocates for healing relationships between veterans and family members who'd initially rejected them for combat injuries.
The transformation had been gradual but complete. The media coverage of her wedding speech and the veteran response had created a national conversation about civilian attitudes toward wounded warriors that she couldn't escape or ignore. Within months, Victoria had become the unwilling face of family rejection, while I'd become a symbol of veteran dignity and community support. The foundation has facilitated reconciliation between over 5,000 veteran family pairs, I continued, describing programs that had grown from the lessons learned during Victoria's public humiliation. We've learned that education about combat trauma and military service can transform rejection into support, shame into pride, and dysfunction into healing. Our program was revolutionary because it addressed the fundamental gap between civilian expectations and military reality that had caused Victoria to view my injuries as family embarrassment rather than honored sacrifice. Her corporate communication skills had proven invaluable for reaching families who shared her initial misconceptions about wounded warrior value. The book we'd co-authored, Healing the Home Front When Families Fail Veterans, had become required reading for military family support programs and had influenced federal policy on veteran mental health and family integration services. My sister saved my life in ways I didn't understand until after I'd almost destroyed her through my ignorance, Victoria had written in the Foundation's mission statement. I spent years seeing her sacrifice as embarrassment instead of recognizing it as the ultimate expression of values I claimed to admire. The congressional testimony was being broadcast live to military bases worldwide, where service members and their families were learning about resources available when civilian relationships were strained by the realities of military service and combat injury. But perhaps the most satisfying triumph was personal. The family dynamics that had been shattered by Victoria's rejection had been rebuilt on mutual respect and shared mission, rather than social expectations and appearance management. Veterans don't need families who tolerate their sacrifice. They need families who honor their sacrifice and understand that visible wounds represent invisible courage that protected the freedom all Americans enjoy. The Wounded Warrior Family Support Act passed unanimously in both houses of Congress, establishing federal funding for programs that prevented the kind of family rejection Victoria had inflicted, and I had survived. Our parents, who had initially supported Victoria's exclusion of me from the wedding, now served as volunteer coordinators for family education programs that helped other parents understand how to support, rather than shame, their wounded veteran children. The wedding that was supposed to be Victoria's social triumph became her greatest teaching moment, our father had told Military Family magazine. We learned that real family honor comes from supporting sacrifice, not hiding from it. The sister who called me an embarrassment had inadvertently created the platform and motivation that allowed me to become a national advocate for wounded veteran dignity, while her own public humiliation had taught her lessons about honor and family loyalty that no legal education could have provided. Sometimes the people who tried to diminish you in public end up creating the circumstances that elevate you beyond anything either of you imagined possible. And sometimes family reconciliation requires one person's public failure to teach lessons that private conversations could never accomplish.
Standing in my daughter Sophia's nursery 7 years later, looking at the framed photo of 300 veterans saluting at Victoria's wedding, I finally understood the gift my sister's cruelty had given me. Her public rejection had forced me to discover what real family looked like and had created a platform for helping thousands of veterans facing similar rejection. Sophia, now 4 years old, with her father's gentle spirit and my stubborn determination, discovered me studying the image one evening as I prepared for a speech at West Point about resilience and chosen family. "Mommy, why did Aunt Victoria used to be mean to you?" she asked with innocent directness. I'd rehearsed this conversation, knowing I'd need to explain why family relationships sometimes require transformation, why some lessons can only be learned through public failure, and why the people who hurt us most can become our greatest teachers. Sometimes, sweetheart, people don't understand what makes someone special until other people show them, I said, lifting her onto my lap. Aunt Victoria thought my soldier scars were ugly, but my veteran friends showed her they were beautiful. Like how my scraped knee shows I'm brave? Sophia asked with perfect childhood logic. Exactly like that. What Victoria's rejection had taught me was the difference between inherited family and chosen family, between appearance and substance, between social acceptance and genuine honor. True belonging wasn't determined by blood relations or social approval, but by shared values, mutual respect, and the willingness to stand with each other when it mattered most. The wisdom I'd gained extended far beyond personal healing. Through the foundation, I'd seen how societal misconceptions about sacrifice and service could devastate families, while education and advocacy could transform rejection into support. One of the most important lessons I've learned, I told audiences at military family workshops, is that sometimes the people who reject us give us exactly what we need to find where we truly belong. Victoria's transformation from my greatest critic to my closest ally had become a powerful symbol for other families struggling with military service and combat injury. Her willingness to acknowledge her mistakes and dedicate her life to preventing similar harm had shown that even the deepest wounds could heal when people chose growth over pride. But perhaps the most profound wisdom came from understanding that my sister's public cruelty had created the exact circumstances needed to demonstrate what veteran dignity looked like when it was properly honored. Those 300 veterans hadn't just stood for me. They'd stood for every wounded warrior who'd ever been told their sacrifice was too uncomfortable for polite society. The wedding that was supposed to celebrate Victoria's social success had instead become a lesson about what real honor looked like when it was displayed by people who'd earned the right to define it. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals become the most powerful catalysts when they force communities to choose between comfort and courage. And sometimes family reconciliation requires one person's public failure to teach lessons that transform everyone involved.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.